Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of one of our 2020 Elul study classes.
What I want to do is, first of all, just call your attention. Many of us, it's been a few years, but many of us know this prayer book, the Siddur Sim Shalom, and use it for many years. We certainly used it at Ramah for many years. And in the beginning of Siddur Sim Shalom, there are texts that are part of the Shacharit service for study before you say Kaddish to Rabbanan. And one of them is, I think, a very important text about hesed that I'm just going to read to you. This text is from the Talmud, Masechet Sukkah, the Talmud, the Tractate of Sukkah, 49b, and Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis teach, deeds of loving kindness are superior to tzedakah. Okay, so deeds of hesed are superior to tzedakah in three ways. So there's a difference between an act of hesed and an act of loving kindness and an act of tzedakah. And according to the Talmud, their deeds of chesed are superior in three ways. Charity can only be accomplished only with money. So tzedakah can only be accomplished with money. Deeds of loving kindness can be accomplished through personal involvement as well as with money. Tzedakah can be given only to the poor. Deeds of loving kindness can be done for both the rich and the poor. And tzedakah applies only to the living, whereas deeds of chesed, deeds of loving kindness, apply to both the living and the dead. And that last explanation, that last phrase, we may know quite well from Jewish funerals, where when we participate in the act of burial, we are participating in what the rabbis called a hesed shel emet, sort of a true, maybe we might say pure act of chesed, because the person who we are burying cannot repay us for the act of chesed that we do. And so we know that when we do this act of chesed, we're not doing it for any ulterior motive, because there is no possibility of repayment. So that's just an interesting frame for us to start to think about the role of chesed in our lives, that it's something that that we can do through money, but also that we can do through acts of goodness. It's something that obviously can be done for both people who are rich and people who are poor, and even something that we can do both for people who are living, but also for people who have died. The question that I want to begin with, just to prime the pump, and I guess what we'll do is, if you have something that you want to, if you have a response, and I actually do want responses, you can use that raise hand function, or if your camera is on, you can literally raise your hand, and then take yourself off of mute. But please only do that if there's not background noise. If there's background noise, I love you dearly. I want to hear what you have to say, but it's going to be disturbing for everybody else. So don't participate. But the question that I have is, when you want to do, I think my assumption going into Rosh Hashanah and during Elul, here you are, you're a group of people who've all signed online in order to take a class about Judaism. I'm assuming that that this is a good group of people, okay? And I assume that you want to do acts of chesed. My question that I want to start us off thinking about is, what prevents us, or what are the challenges in doing acts of chesed, assuming that we want to do them? What holds us back from succeeding in those situations? Renee? Is it Renee or Rennie?
Not knowing how it will be received. Sometimes what we think a person needs may not necessarily be something that they feel that they need or want.
Yeah, so in order to do this stuff well, and you can go back on mute, in order to do this stuff well, there's a little bit of mind reading. It's not actually mind reading, but there's a great deal of sensitivity that we need to have, because it's the fundamental aspect of this is that an act of chesed is not about us, right? I would say it's almost an oxymoron, right, to try to do an act of chesed that a person doesn't want. Then if the person doesn't want it or it's not helpful, then it may not be an act of chesed. That may not be totally true. Sometimes people, with children might not know what's good for them, or sometimes people are out of control. And we might be in a close enough relationship where we can assert that, but that's very tricky business. Diane?
What's holding me back right now, literally, from doing something that I usually like to do, I can't give money to the homeless. I just know if I gave all my money away, it wouldn't help. So what I do is give like Trader Joe's trail mix packets and things like that. And right now, unfortunately, I think the homeless are in a horrible position. But what's holding me back is I roll my window down, and most of these people don't wear masks. They're standing right there and talking to me. And I just can't do that. My mother started yelling at me for doing that because she's 85 and I bring her groceries. So I can't get sick. I shouldn't be this close to somebody without a mask. That holds me back.
Yeah. Sometimes people, we have to see, hey, is this going to be helpful for the other person? But also there's a second piece of this, and we're going to come back to this idea, but it takes two to tango. And sometimes the person who needs help also needs to take some steps to help themselves in order for that act of chesed to work, right? Judith?
Well, I hate to say this, but inertia very often is just it's easier to do if other people are doing it with you or motivating you. And I think in terms of some of these things that I'm trying to participate in, get out the vote, or, sometimes doing things in a group or knowing that other people are doing it. I know in our temple, people are packing food that the rabbi's wife is taking over to homeless shelters. So you're part of a community doing it. So if it's just me, it's not like I don't feel like I can make a difference. It's just, I don't know, just that energy, and particularly when you're home, that energy of doing it.
Great. Not great, right? But great. Great in the sense of, I think it's an important insight. You can disagree or agree with this statement, but one of my teachers, I was mentoring with Rabbi Wolpe when I first met Rabbi Schatz, and she was just Rebecca then, and I think you were 12, is that right? Something like that. But Rabbi Wolpe will often talk about sort of, it's a challenging thing to say. If somebody says I'm spiritual, he'll push them to say, how much tzedakah do you give, right? And what he's trying to tease out with that question is the boundary between, or the danger of spirituality becoming self-serving or self-involved versus involved with the world. And I think that it doesn't always happen, but the power, Judith, I think, of religious communities is that they create a context for us to overcome that inertia. If you surround yourself with good people and it's what's happening around you, then it can help you to do that more often. And by the way, some of that also is just if you're part of a community, then you're meeting people, you're hearing the response more, or the need more often. So I want to thanks for that introduction, just to get the thoughts going. Rebecca, do we go till 3:00? Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. I was like, 3 o'clock, that's so many hours from now. But yes, 3 o'clock for you.
Sorry, 3 o'clock my time. 3 o'clock my time. So I want to, I'm going to share screen for a moment. And I apologize. What that will mean is that I won't be able to see as many of your faces as I would like. But I want to just look at a couple of texts to begin. Though I just finished telling you that Gimilut Chasadim, that acts of chesed and tzedakah are different. This is a text that it's usually thought of as responding specifically to tzedakah. It's Maimonides' ladder. This is quite famous, 8 levels of tzedakah, one higher than the other. And the only thing that I want to show here is that if I did, if I took this away and you didn't have a chance to look at it for, or be reminded, and I asked you, what's the highest level of tzedakah? Okay. A lot of people sort of have in their minds that the highest level of tzedakah is, tell me if you think I'm right? Where you are anonymous and the person to whom you give is anonymous, right? And so neither one, is in this situation of knowing who it is that they're helping. And what I just like to, maybe all of you know this, but I like to just point out in introducing this text is that if you look at the top, what we read is that the highest degree exceeded by none is that of the person who assists a poor Jew by providing him with a gift or a loan, or by accepting him into a business partnership, or by helping him to find employment, right? In a word, by putting him where he can do without other people's aid. And the thing that I like to point out about that is when you enter into a loan or you give someone a job, that's not anonymous at all. That's actually bringing someone into your life. And it is teaching them to fish, but what I'm getting at here is it's not anonymity. It's actually a deeper level of involvement because, again, you are helping, you're teaching them to fish, you're helping them to remain equals, right? Rather than treating them in a hierarchical way where you are the giver and they are the recipient, okay? And I think that the story, there's a beautiful story from the Talmud that I want to look at next that sort of illustrates this, illustrates this point quite beautifully. You may have seen this before. It's from Ketubot 67b. Like all stories from the Talmud, it's, sometimes you need pronouns or there are too many pronouns, you don't know who they're referred to and the whatnot. But can I ask someone, it's very hard to teach over Zoom, and I like to at least try and have a little more voices than my own. Can I ask someone, and Rebecca, can you call on someone, because I can't see everybody's faces,
yeah, sure,
to read this story from the Talmud?
Sure. Jay, you're unmuted. You want to read?
Of course.
Great.
Mar Ukba had a poor man in his neighborhood into whose door socket he used to throw 4 zuz every day. Okay, and zuz are some money, okay? And what does it mean to throw into the door socket? It's not exactly clear. It functioned a little bit differently. Maybe think of it as one of those mail slots, okay, where you just, you would stick it in there and it would get into the person's house. Okay, once the poor man thought, I will go and see who does me this kindness. On that day, it happened that Mar Ukba was late at the house of study, and his wife was coming home with him. As soon as the poor man saw them moving the door, he went out after them, but they fled from him and ran into a furnace from which the fire had just been swept. Mar Ukba's feet were burning, and his wife said to him, Raise your feet and put them on mine. As he was upset, she said to him, I am usually at home, and my benefaction are direct. And what was the reason for all that? Because Mar Zukba ben Tobiah said in the name of Rab, others state Rab Hana ben Bizna said in the name of Rab Simeon the Pious, and others, etc. Better had a man thrown himself into a fiery furnace than publicly put his neighbor to shame. Whence do we deliver this? From the action of Tamar, for it is written in Scripture, when she was brought forth, she sent for her father to her father-in-law.
Okay, and then that's the and what she said. So I'm going to leave the last part of it for us to figure out another time. But can somebody now translate for me? And I want to leave it up there a little bit more so you can look at it. But can somebody try to tell me the story that we just read in what I would say plain English, right? Translate from English to English. What happened in this story? What was the drama that took place?
I'll try.
Okay, go ahead, Jay.
There were two people. There was a person who was giving tzedakah, and the other person wanted to figure out who it was that was giving it to them, but the other person didn't want them to know. So he ran off and didn't care what happened to him, and ended up going into a furnace where it was very hot.
And what happened in the furnace?
That he told his wife the most important thing was he didn't want to put this person to shame, to let him know who he was.
All right, so we're close. Let me thank you. Right, let me see if I can tie up a few loose ends. So, first of all, Mar Ukba is a great sage, very high in the Babylonian Academy, and he would deliver tzedakah, right, but anonymously, right, to this poor person on a regular basis. And he was doing so because he didn't want to be found out. But the poor person said, I want to thank this person, okay? And Mar Ukba, maybe he had, read number 2 on Maimonides' ladder, right? I'm joking about that because Maimonides wasn't, until 500 years after this. But, Mar Ukba had this idea that, okay, it's better to stay anonymous. Better to stay anonymous. I don't that somehow if this person meets me, that they'll feel ashamed because they'll know who it is. And so, it wasn't malicious. He was trying to protect the dignity of this person, but he had in his own mind a sense of what would shame this person and what would preserve their dignity. And so he wanted to stay anonymous. And he's walking with his wife home, and the two of them go into the furnace. In terms of the realia of this, I can't exactly explain how it is that he just ran into a furnace, but a big area, I imagine, where bread was baked or something like that. And let's just, I don't think it was on, okay, but the embers were pretty warm in there. Now, what happens in the furnace, though, is when I read this story, it doesn't exactly say a miracle was done for Marzutra's wife, but it's an interesting question, if we read this as literature, to say what is the symbolism, right, of the fact that her feet don't get burned. Okay? And so she says, oh, honey, your feet are burning? Mine are fine, right? Come stand on my feet so you don't get hurt. And Marzutra is going, why is a miracle being done for her, right? But it's not being done for me. He's taking it almost as a diminishment, right? That his feet are burning, but his wife's are not. And the way that she explains this miracle to her husband is, well, my benefactions, when I do, let's say for our purposes, acts of hesed, I do so directly, right? Whereas you, honey, you do it anonymously. And that is supposed to explain, right, to her husband why it is that she is not being affected this way. So let me ask, I think one question I want to ask you is, what do you take as the symbolism of the fact that her feet are not burning, the way that his are? Or what else do you think is going on in this story?
I think that he's embarrassed at having been spotted, and the wife is not. So the embarrassment is the cause of his feet being and feeling burning, and the fact that she's totally uninvolved, the heat doesn't bother her.
So the fact that she is involved, is that what you were saying?
No, not involved. She hasn't been giving the tzedakah, so she's not being chased by this man for this man to find out who's doing the tzedakah. Whereas he wants to be anonymous, and he's embarrassed that he knows who this man is that's been taking some of his zuzim, and he doesn't want to be found out.
So I think that I agree with you, certainly for part of this, which is that, and you can go back on mute now, I agree with you that he has been staying out of it. And I guess what I want to say is he doesn't have calluses on his feet. Okay. One of the ways that you learn to take the heat is by interacting with people. And he has tried to stay anonymous. But his wife, right, says, my benefactions are direct, right? When I do something good, I may not have been involved in this situation with him, but I know what it means to be face to face with another person. Jackie, go ahead.
I had a different thought about it. I think about like when Rabbi Dorf talks about unctuous neofrumkeit, that like to him, this is the best way to do it. And so he's literally going to run into fire so that he doesn't like drop a level in his tzedakah. And his wife is just like, you could just face the guy, like you did your best. And also it is what it is sometimes. And so his like that's what happens. Like when you go too hard or whatever it is, like your feet end up on fire.
Yeah. And I appreciate you, raising that element of it. I'm going to name it in the following way. I think that and then Judith, I see your hand. One of the challenges, I think that when we engage in acts of helping someone else, on the one hand, I'm a rabbi. Okay? I'm pro mitzvahs. Okay, I like the idea of not only doing mitzvahs, but having a sense that when we do something, we're doing it out of a sense of mitzvah, right? There are by the way, some of the rabbis define kavanah, right? Having intention for a mitzvah as saying to yourself, not only am I doing this, but I'm doing this out of a sense of obligation to my creator, right? That's how some rabbis define it. But on the other hand, to me, there's something wrong in treating another person as an instrument for my relationship with God. Does that make sense? In other words, I'm going to do this act of kindness because I want to, as you said, Rabbi Dorf, what is it, unctuous frumkeit or whatever. I'm going to go up on my ladder, right? And so what you're doing is you're having this whole internal experience about religiosity. And in some ways, it means that the person who you are, the person doesn't matter anymore because they're just a tool for you. I would say if we use Martin Buber's language, you're treating the other as an I-it, right? Rather than an I-thou. And what Mar Ukba's wife is saying is, when I do acts of chesed, I engage with people as I-thou. And if I'm just treating it as another act on, another rung on the ladder, then I'm actually missing, I may be doing it, but I'm missing it. Right, Judith?
Yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to say, is that she's chosen to do it directly. Care if it's not the top level. He has chosen to do it anonymously, and if the other person wasn't pursuing him, then that's fine to do it anonymously. But here he was disregarding the other person's wishes in terms of wanting to know who he was. So it was all about him more than maybe it was a lot about him rather than a lot about the act itself.
Right. This person was signaling, hey, I would like to get to know you. And here he is in the name of religion, in the name of his religiosity, here he is running away. Whereas, and there's something wrong with that, right? That you just sort of, you're running away to try to have a higher religious experience. I think somebody like, Buber and somebody like Levinas, who Levinas famously said that God is found in the face of the other, would argue the deepest religious experience you can have is not by fleeing from the world, but by being deeply engaged in the world, right? Edie, and then I want to get to an Amichai poem. Edie knows that the Rabbi Emeritus of the synagogue where I am is a big fan of Yehuda Amichai, does wonderful translations, and I am honored to be his student, so we'll include that as well. Edie, go ahead.
This won't take long, but I was just thinking that what you were just saying sort of reminds me of what the first person was saying when you were asking about what prevents you from doing good deeds sometimes, and it's that you don't know whether the other person is going to be happy about that or not happy. Like you assume what you're doing is what they want and will make them happy. And here's a perfect example in a way of where it's not necessary. I mean, the deed itself is a good thing, but the fact that he wants to remain anonymous, whereas the person he is being kind to doesn't see that as being the best thing. He has a different motive. So I just thought it was interesting that they came up in two different ways, but it's a good example.
Yeah. And
Rabbi, this is
Casey.
This is Casey Stern from Temple Beth Am.
Go ahead, Casey.
Hi. We're told as when Abraham and Sarah had their tent open that the mitzvah is done for its own purpose. It's more than running out to someone, but just the intention of it is so powerful. And you do it for its own merit, not for reward or anything like that, just to respect. It really gives you a lot of leeway, it doesn't make you seem like, oh, this command, you have to do this commandment. It gives you the spirit of doing it with fluidity.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think that part of what I was saying before, and we're going to see this in the Amichai poem, I think that, an earlier comment was about inertia. And I think part of what religions and religious communities can do, and that impulse of mitzvah, is to push you beyond what you yourself would do. And so I think there is a place for hearing that voice of command, and by being part of an external community that moves you beyond your own inertia. And yet at the same time, the danger that you see in the story is that they also can take you out of that sense of, I'm doing this for its own sake, right? I'm doing this because there's a person here in front of me. And so the question is balance. And, Rabbi Schatz has designed a wonderful program. And this week, as we think about the midah of hesed, right? It's a very interesting question that we can ask ourselves. on the one hand, am I doing enough chesed in my life, and how can I do more? And on the other hand, making sure that in our efforts to develop our own chesed, meter, that we're not merely treating the people who we're trying to help as an instrument for our own spirituality. So let me, I'm going to share the screen again, and maybe we can, Rebecca, will you choose someone else to read the Amichai poem? We'll do it in the wonderful translation by Rabbi Ziegler, and then I will follow up by reading it in Hebrew. And I'm going to leave it up there for a bit because there's just lots to think about. And I want to give us all time to do that.
Barbara,
so
oh, sorry. I was calling on someone to read. I cut you off. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No. I'm all done.
Barbara, do you want to read?
Those were the days of chesed. I heard them once say on a winter night street during days of loneliness and pain. Even for days of chesed, we need at least two, one to give chesed and one to receive it. When they are separated, the chesed does not abide, or it is spilled into the street as if from a broken pipe. Religions do not do chesed, they only remind, empty time, with a bell, with a muezzin's call, with a siren or a shofar, with knocks on the door during days of penitence. God, they are unable to remind or his chesed.
I'll read this now in the Hebrew as well. Oops. Can I get it all on one page? There. Almost. Elu hayu yemei chesed. Shamati fa'am omrim bimei bididut v'tza'ar b'rechov shel choref. Gam liyemei chesed tzrichim lefachot shnayim. Noten ha-chesed v'ha-mekabel oto. Kshem nifradim gam ha-chesed lo nishar. O nishpach l'rechov kmo mishever tinor. Datot lo osot chesed. Hen rak mazkirot zman reik. B'fa'amon. B'kri'at muazin. B'tzofar uv'shofar uv'nishikot badelet. B'yimei slichot. Et ha'elohim enan yecholot lahaskir. Velo et chasto. And I'm sorry I left off the bottom. Miyom shevadlu hakorbanot. Nishar kol echad imatzmo lahakriv. That last passage in English, since the day that sacrifices ended, each person is left with himself. And to sacrifice, it can either mean to sacrifice or to bring close. To sacrifice or to bring close. One thing which I want to point you to, just in terms of this last line, and my apologies for not bringing it on the page, but those of you who have a Siddur Sim Shalom at home, you can look this up on page 14 at the bottom of your Siddur Sim Shalom. But there's a passage from Avoti Rebbe Natan that reads as follows. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was once walking with his disciple Rabbi Joshua near Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Joshua looked at the temple ruins and said, "Alas for us, the place which atoned for the sins of the people of Israel through the ritual of animal sacrifice lies in ruins." Then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai spoke to him these words of comfort. "Be not grieved, my son. There's another way of gaining atonement, even though the temple is destroyed. We must now gain atonement through chesed, through gimilut chasadim, through acts of loving kindness, as it is written, loving kindness I desire, not sacrifice. From Hosea, he chesed chafatzti zavach. And when he ends this poem by saying, now that the korbanot, right, are, since the day that the korbanot ended, each person is left with himself to sacrifice. I think very much he's playing off in this idea that now what we have to sacrifice are acts of loving kindness. He surely knew that Mishnah, did Amichai. So I would love to just hear from you. I realize you can't quite get all of it on the page, but love to hear what lines in this rise up to you, get you thinking about chesed, get you thinking about the holidays and the work that we are in the midst of doing.
Yeah, I think what really spoke to me was this: religions do not do hesed. Because I think so many times, no matter what religion you are, it's easy to think that, oh, my synagogue will take care of that, or, my church feeds the poor, which means you are really remote from the people who you're doing that chesed for. And I don't know, I just really like that.
Right there, I will tell you that I Jennifer and I loved Los Angeles, and we miss Los Angeles. And one of the rich parts of living in Durham, North Carolina, is that there's no big Jewish community. If you want something to happen in the Jewish community, guess what? You got to do it. And there's a tremendous ethic of we are responsible because there's nobody else. And I think that a challenge, I think we feel more of a sense of that than we did in Los Angeles. And I think that a challenge of living in, it's obviously part of the beauty of living in a tremendous, Jewish community is that there are so many resources, but the challenge is that you might conclude that religions do chesed, and they don't. Other thoughts, reactions, Annette?
I always dislike so much the organized religious. GoFundMe and things of that sort. I don't know. But I also don't always know people in need. Like, for example, at the holidays. And my belief is very often I'll go to, let's say, the rabbis, and I'll say, I'm willing to give you this much for somebody who doesn't have for a holiday dinner. See that they have a couple of holiday dinners, from the caterer. Or, let's say, during Passover. I sometimes went to the smaller, when I say smaller rabbis was a smaller congregation among the Orthodox community that we knew. And I said, look, do you know people? I don't want to know them, but you know people who are coming who can't do Pesach. It's very expensive. Here's our Abe's and my contribution. I like to give it. I know that there are people who know individuals who need a little help. They're not ready to be thrown on the street. I wouldn't be able to do that. But maybe a nice dinner at the holiday is tough for them. I'm overweight. That's why I'm obsessed with food. But it could be somebody else. It could be something else. Right now I'm helping a friend pay for caregivers.
Well, and I think, Annette, that so it's good, right? I appreciate what you said. And I appreciate what you do.
I don't want to know who it is.
Right. And so it's good to have those mechanisms, right? That allow us if we don't know someone. I do think that that Amichai is would be pushing us to say if we don't know people in need, that maybe that tells us something about we want to be part of a community that does that, but also, hey, how do I get to know more people in need? Right? What does it mean to surround myself? I want to give other people a chance, but what does it mean to surround myself, right? And to build such a world where maybe I'm walled off in that way. And so the chesed, right, is to say I need to move, to be aware, right, of that challenge. Rachel, go ahead.
All right, I'll lower my hand electronically here. Thank you. The statement about reminding the end of the second stanza, God, they are unable to remind, or God's hesed. And I was trying to think, where would I put the commas in that sentence? God, comma, they are unable to remind, or they are unable, comma, to remind. And I'm feeling like the task is for us to be agents of God's hesed, that God can't do it without us in that way. I also really liked the multiple religion imagery there. The mezuin call, the siren, the shofar, the knock on the door. All faiths need to engage with hesed. And my last comment, to kind of build on what Annette said, is for me, I try to look at hesed as something almost more tangible than donating money, or more engaging of my time. That's not to say that donating money isn't also an act of hesed, but that there's so many other ways also.
I really appreciate your focus on et ha-Elohim enan yecholot lahaskir velo et chasto, right? Remember his subject here, the subject of that stanza is religions, right? Religions can't remind God of God's chesed. That's a pretty big indictment, right? And by the way, what does it mean to remind God of God's chesed? Renee?
That he has to have rachmanut for people.
Yeah, and classically on Rosh Hashanah, right, there is during the whole high holidays, there's a classical rabbinic image of moving God, that we blow the shofar to move God from Kisei Hadin to Kisei Harachamim, from the throne of judgment to the throne of compassion. And Amichai is saying religions can't do that. To me, this is almost an indictment of prayer. He's saying these external things, whether it's a muazzin, right? He's not only down on the Jews here, right? But the muazzin, or the shofar, or people going around and knocking on doors, those are not the things that move God. to a place of compassion, if you want to move God to a place of compassion in the heavens, this is how I hear Amichai. The Kabbalists have this idea of iteruta dilatata, iteruta dilaela, which means an awakening below creates an awakening above. And the awakening below, it can't be shofars, and it can't be muazzins, and it can't be slichot and knocking on the door. If you want to awaken God's compassion, or remind God of God's hesed, you have to do that, right? You have to have the act of chesed rather than its reminders. Somebody put something in the chat. Did I do it? Does somebody else want to add something to our conversation?
Rachel was just commenting. Rachel Green, who just spoke. She said, "Oh, that God should do this or that for us because of the merit of our ancestors."
I said that's an indictment of that kind of prayer.
Right.
That the poem, as I understand it, is saying that shouldn't be our approach, which feels to me, I mean, it's a theme in all of our prayer language, but it seems to be kind of made bigger or exaggerated in our high holiday prayer language.
Barbara?
This prayer goes along with what I put in the chat about needing one to give and one to receive. Because as an ophthalmologist for 49 plus years in private practice in Beverly Hills, I have consistently given my time to people in need, to organizations, Vista Del Mar, and Medi-Cal, and other organizations, the family clinics. And it makes me feel good that Amichai says I'm doing a good thing, which I've always felt that I was doing a good thing. So I fully approve of this poem.
Well, you don't need my approval, but I approve too. Let me just finish. It's 2:57. So, this last stanza, since the day that sacrifices ended, each person is left with himself to sacrifice. I think that's a wonderful meditation for us to take into the high holidays, into the high holiday season. That, there may be a blessing. I don't know about you guys, and we are going all Zoom this year. And I love our prayer services. And to the folks from Beth El who are here, we're going to do our best. And I still think that what happens over Zoom, God willing, will be meaningful and will be good. And it's not going to be what was. Okay? And there may be a blessing in leading this high holidays for all of us less into the sound of the shofar, and less into the sound of the cantor's voice, and less into the ritual of the synagogue. Because it's taken away from us. I think that the opportunity is that it forces us to focus on what is truly needed during the high holiday season, which is for us to give of ourselves, to bring ourselves close and acts of chesed. It's not to say that the rest of the stuff doesn't matter and isn't important. But I think Amichai's poem is a good corrective So Rebecca, if I can steal one more minute, I just want to read this poem one more time to let it sink in. And I'm happy to share this with Rebecca to send out for folks who would like to maybe put it in your tallis bag or put it by next to your screen, during the tefillot, or keep it for a conversation over Erev Rosh Hashanah dinner or Rosh Hashanah lunch. Those were days of chesed, I heard them once say on a winter street, during days of loneliness and pain. Even for days of chesed, we need at least two, one to give chesed and one to receive it. When they are separated, the chesed does not abide, or it is spilled into the street as if from a broken pipe. Religions do not do chesed. They only remind empty time with a bell, with a muazzin's call, with a siren or a shofar, with knocks on the door during days of penitence. God they are unable to remind, or his chesed. Since the day that sacrifices ended, each person is left with himself to sacrifice.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.